bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschehen? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab. Hier ließ sich reine taufen, dass der Mensch
That's that one. And honestly, we can just get cracking if you want.
Yeah.
This is the New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen, and it is also
Yeah, this is also the Stark Truth with Robert Stark. We're doing a simulcast, and yeah, everything I've recorded has been this is the first. I don't know if you call it a field report, but we're usually we record separately from home. We're actually recording. We're taking like a short weekend trip, and we're in Lake Henshaw. It's it's in the backcountry of San Diego, and it's actually somewhere that really scenic, but it's actually somewhere I've never actually been. I've been to San Diego many times, but it's near Julian and also the Anza Borrego State Park.
Right, we did a little weekend trip to what I guess you'd call the east part of San Diego County. Doxing our trip, but it's not where we live, so I guess that's okay. We visited the desert. I actually wanted to field record this in the desert, but that proved to be pretty unrealistic given how much dust there is everywhere and how fucking hot it was. And so we're recording this from our Airbnb in Lake Henshaw. And Robert, this is your first ever field recording?
Yeah, at least for this, for Stark Truth Radio.
Right. Yeah, we've done.
Well, video. We have done video recordings for the YouTube channel.
Yeah, this is kind of like that, except I guess maybe we realize we don't really need the video element. I mean, we've started for New Right Pod. We've started to do a few field recordings recently. I really like them. I like the in-person energy, but it's occurred to me I don't necessarily need the sweat of like editing on Adobe Premiere Pro, which I'm not very good at anyway. And it's kind of you can kind of have your cake and eat it too by doing a quick, easy pod while field recording in person. Like if this was 1 year ago, I would have done our Giorgiani interview this way. I think it would have been better.
Right.
But that's neither here nor there. Welcome to the simulcast show, and today we're going to be talking about. What would you call it, Robert? The new religion? A new spiritual movement?
New spiritual movement for California. Sounds really. Yeah, I was thinking like, well, the idea came about. We were hiking.
You don't want to be too loud. That's fine. Just
yeah, the idea came about like we were hiking up above Vernal Falls in Yosemite, and Matt also the same day Matt got me, practically,
yeah.
I'd say maybe not killed, but injured, but for tripping over the stream, but above Vernal Falls, and Emerald Lake, pool above Vernal Falls in Yosemite. Him starting a religion, and I don't know. He's this like extensively long, like academic, kind of esoteric. This very long, like academic article, which Matt does. Yeah, he does write in his writing style is very academic.
You're talking about my Renaissance of the Ritual.
Yeah, the Renaissance of the Ritual. But when I first started talking this new religion, it's like, Matt, are you onto something? Or are you just like so full? Are you just full of shit? And I keep calling him up, and I go, Matt, how are you coming on that new religion?
Yeah. It's a bit of a meme. I'm not really trying to. Well, no, I won't. I will neither affirm nor deny anything. It started off as one of those things where it's sort of a half joke, but is also serious. And yes, we were talking about it on our excellent trip to Yosemite National Park last September. And I mean, my answer is like, I'm both serious and not. I will get more into this later, I think, but For me, the whatever this project is, it would be an anti-grift in the sense that it would not be for profit. It wouldn't be about hierarchy. It would certainly not be about
Well, I
media.
gotta clarify. Yeah, yeah. If any of us write books, obviously, I don't want to like hate on Griff so much because I used to be more principled, like pointing out. It's always been like pointing out all these people who are grifters and viewing them as complete garbage. But I don't. I've changed because I think like making money independent from just like the corporate shit. I mean that's living the dream
Right.
basically.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so yeah. So but I do think it's not even yeah, so it's like selling books. If this does take off and we like sell books, like sure, why or Substack paid Substack subscription, sure, why not?
Well,
But I
yeah.
guess the point I think what Matt means is there are these like the cult movements of the past, and I do think
not
that's
even, not even the big dark cult movements, but even just your average crap. And there's a
Yeah,
dime a dozen here in
these
California.
stupid it's more
Yeah.
this like hierarchical structure where this person has this special knowledge that they have to pay. So yeah, like where do you but then the kind of question is a lot of people maybe start off with good intentions and then the money and status comes
Right,
in, which is
right.
understandable.
It's
So like the
understandable, but
question
let me just say, I don't want to be in the position that is this bullshitty position where people are in, where they're like making you pay them for their supposed wisdom. I mean, not everyone hates that. Everyone except low IQ people smells that a mile away. That is not what this is at all. Whatever this ends up being. I mean, I take some inspiration from, and I don't know that I'm not extensively read in this, and I'm not a discordi. I don't even know how to say the word discordantist myself, but there's that prominent. Quasi right wing discordiantism movement that was founded in I think Whittier, California, and just two friends chatting at a bowling alley, and whatever this is would be more in the vein of that, a self-initiatory just thing I'm exploring and doing it semi-publicly online, and anyone is welcome to join me. Anyone is welcome to join us.
yeah. So who was the figure or some columnist or I forget who it was, they predicted that the 2020s will see a big resurgence in cults, much like the 70s and 80s.
I don't know who the columnist was.
You remember that? You know what I'm talking
I
about.
remember it. I feel like it's probably been a prediction that was made in one or more places, but I don't remember the specific column. But anyway, I don't know if we've actually really seen that come into full fruition. I feel like it's a little bit harder to start like a Charles Manson-esque cult as it probably was back in the 60s and 70s, because I think people are a little more aware, and there's all these cult watch websites. So I don't know if we've seen the full fruition
Actually,
of that.
I do remember. I can remember when I was in like middle school age in maybe '97. I remember I do remember like the Heaven's Gate cult, which was like a mass suicide. That was very tragic. But that's
Right.
actually like the same. I don't know how close they were to where we are, but maybe like 45-minute drive. I remember that. So that was the later part of the 90s. So you think of maybe the 80s, the 70s or 80s, like sort of the 60s counterculture, and then these different all kinds of different cults. So it's hard to say like pinpoint in one era. Maybe a lot in the 80s as well.
Kind
And
of
the
that
one
post-
that
I
Joaquin,
don't
the
know,
one
it's-
like there was the most controversial, like the one
Children of God.
Children of God of Joaquin Phoenix was in with when he was a kid, and then the one like Jim Jones
Of course.
in South America, like
Yeah.
Guyana. So I think that's like you said, mostly like the 70s.
So what it is,
But
this
then
is just me,
yeah,
like-
then also but then the 80s wave maybe more economic focus. It's hard to say.
Maybe. I mean, you could watch like an Adam Curtis movie and chart some of these cultural changes. What I would say from my armchair pop social psychology position here would be, it's kind of same with the rise in serial killers at a certain point, which there's all kinds of theories on. This was an element of the kind of immediately, so 60s, 70s, petering out a little bit in the 80s into the 90s, immediately post mid-century boom in the sort of underbelly of the boom, so to speak, the underbelly of baby boomer culture, the underbelly of opulence. All of that kind of ends up feeding into that cult hysteria. We're going off a little off topic. My only point is I think that the the soil is indeed fertile for cultic type thinking. I just don't know if from like a criminological perspective, cults are really taken off. But the soil is definitely ripe for the type of New Age spirituality and for occultism. Again, armchair social psychology, be the armchair social psychology holding that in times of chaos, which we're certainly in, people drift more toward a notion like the occult, which finds basically structure in chaos, which I fully admit is probably part of my attraction to it, is living in these socially atomized and chaotic times, and wanting to kind of create some order out of that for myself. So I think that both the kind of the fabric of society and its chaos right now is fertile for these ideas. But we also wanted to talk about California as a literal fertile soil, ostensibly.
But then you have questions like what California kind of meant in the past, and this is off on a tangent. But like one of the reasons why, like as a lot of you know, I was involved with the Galexit movement and like why it failed, because I think it failed like of them trying to kind of create an identity out of scratch, as California is very deracinated. But I think a lot of what made California this kind of unique, could say like a Promethean spirit, and this ties in with all these like religious cults that were founded here, like Michael Marinacci's California Jesus chronicalizes that. I think like Scientology took off here. Various Christian cults. Yeah, that's true.
Which isn't real.
Charles Manson, the cults of all the cults, like, but a lot of it, like what it meant. I think a lot of what made California Promethean and this sense of the spirit of radical creativity was its relation with America, how people keep moving like further west.
Yeah.
And I think Galexit, I think why Galexit failed, besides it is very obviously not so much, I'm not even talking about the legal construct of creating a new nation, just the sort of identity aspect, as California is kind of deracinated. But I think what made America unique was the Americans moving west to reinvent themselves. Mm-hmm. And Galexit wants to kind of create this like convoluted civic nationalism based on the identity of like the original Californios, but then also using like new immigrants as like a building block to create something new. And that just, I mean, it was something I was involved with, but I think actually looking back on it, I think it just, it's a marginal movement, maybe a very modest, small size movement that was able to get some media publicity when Trump was elected. But I think because of that, I think it's not really untapped by, it didn't really tap into those factors about California.
Right.
But it is true because it very much, I think what made California Promethean was its relationship to America, and that's what I think they're.
That's why there's so many new religions.
That's why there were so many new religions, just as the sense of sort of like being a colony of a colony. Right. I think it's also a factor like why California, what made it Promethean, but then also why it's become so deracinated and why it's so stagnating as well. But but you do want to, there are these like spiritual movements that emerged out of California. And I guess the other thing, but like the esotericism to like fascist pipeline, that does seem where it's not political. It's like esotericism and extreme romanticism. That is a thing. And even going back, like you do see kind of some overlap with like New Age culture, where New Age culture is linked to liberalism, kind of a lot of things like New Age culture to the hippie movement, but also to kind of techno-libertarianism, to maybe a bit like of a fascist aspect. So that is interesting, in a lot of also like the politics of these religious cults, because I remember there was this obscure kind of like third positionist group called the Order of Outlaw. They were like third positionist, and I met them.
Were they associated with Manson?
Yeah, they're admirers of Charles
Yeah.
Manson, and they were also associated with kind of like the new right scene. I remember they're like into like radical deep ecology.
Okay, give me a chance here. Yeah, no. So a couple things to unpack when you said I agree that I think I remember there's like a Sallow forum chain on this, like why are there so many weirdos in California? And I think I think that's true. I think it's a fair assessment. I think there is a negative side to that where you have a lot of liberal and otherwise grifty and annoying weirdos starting religious movements in California. But I think there's a positive side too, which I'll get to. And I basically, I remember there was all kinds of reasons cited on this Sallow forum chain, ranging from everything from the weather rotting the soul of European man, the nice weather not being challenging. But I think that the basic idea that it is the individualists within the already individualistic American culture moving
Yeah,
out.
California.
There's also
could you make the point? Could you make the point that like California is a colony of a colony?
yeah, right. California's a colony of a colony, and there's quite literally a lot of open space, or at least there used to be. Still is. Where I mean,
Well,
we're
we are
in
right now,
exactly.
Yeah. We
We're in
see
East
it right out the
San
window,
Diego
looking
County.
we're
Yeah.
overlooking like this vast valley, and it's just something. I don't know, something kind of esoteric. I don't know, mysterious about it.
Right. Yeah, I mean we're in East County, San Diego, which if anyone's ever actually been to the county knows is very remote. Where San Diego is one of the larger and more sprawling cities in the country. But if you get into East County, it's quite sprawling. Same with LA which is even more sprawling, but nevertheless there's still open space. So I say all this to say California has been very much inhabited, and it's known for sprawl and known for massive population. Yet, nevertheless, you can still drive a couple hours outside of any of the cities and see that original vision of the open space, which I think, yeah, again, it's literally in the soil, in that fertile open space soil for new religions to grow. You mentioned Michael Marinacci, one of the co-authors of Weird California, part of the Weird series, also wrote his own book, California Jesus, which focuses specifically on the Christian denominations, of which there are many, including our friend, not our friend, but including Mr. Mel Gibson's Sede Vacantis Church, as a, there's a lot of even denominations of Christianity that have grown up here. But I basically agree with the point that you made, that it's the individualistic spirit. And then in terms of the New Age to fascism pipeline, well, I don't want to get too into highly controversial topics here, and I don't identify with this personally, but you mentioned, what was it, the Order of Atwa?
Yeah, Order of Atwa. I met some of them at I don't want to. It was a long time ago, but
Right? Yeah.
it was a political event for some new right organization in Santa Cruz, like in 2012, and they were like a group. They lived out in a remote, like a kind of a commune, like a hippie type commune somewhere in Northern California. But they were like third positionists and radical, like deep ecologists in the vein of like Pentti Linkola. And they also were admirers of Charles Manson,
Which is
and
obviously
some of them
sus, but-
some of the members, I think one of his Charles Manson's girlfriends, may have been involved, and they were they actually believed he was framed. They were which I mean, I'm not gonna get into that.
You'd have to talk to Boyd Rice or Adam Parfrey or whoever. About
Yeah,
that,
what
but-
is their connection? Yeah, so
Oh, that's a whole nother topic. They're also
Yeah, they're also
Californians.
wait.
They're actually probably highly. We could do a
they
whole.
both are. I think Boyd Rice is even from San Diego. I mean,
Yep.
Adam Parfrey's dead, but I did get to interview him. I actually did get to interview him. Boyd Rice is someone I've never corresponded with, and I don't know what he's up to now. He was more like, they were part of like 90s apocalypse culture. Richard Wollstonecraft, Jim Goad, even.
Yep. Yeah, no, and they're relevant to this, very California based, and they definitely, even as just a meme or a joke, and Sean Partridge being another great guy to cite here. And the Partridge Family Temple is still
that's
active, which is a bit of a
California?
I've met a few of their members around LA. They have some. This is a tangent, but they have some people, some younger actresses and whatnot. Yeah, that's surprising. I guess I shouldn't say surprisingly, but it's the Partridge Family Temple has lived on well past the 90s. But no, it's relevant to this topic because this notion of esotericism to fascism pipeline, or New Age to fascism pipeline, or maybe fascism is the wrong word, but New Age. Let's put it this way: New Age to based New Age pipeline is very real, and it's something that I'm somewhat interested in. It's something you meet people who kind of deal in these new age type spiritual ideas, this eclecticism of looking, to Exorient Lux, looking to the Eastern thought for light, and even looking to occult traditions of the West and Kabbalah and Wicca and Crowley type ideas. These have a these ideas are not, there's the left wing new age cliche, but actually a lot of right wing thinkers and movements, going back to even some prominent ones, which I'm not going to name here, delve pretty extensively into some of these occult ideas. And I'm also reminded of the new right organization in question that was affiliated with the Ottawa group, or had the connection there. Well, there's some notion there of West Coast new rightism, shall we say, that emerged from that scene, that is also perhaps relevant here, where you have people who have stereotypically liberal type interests, whether it's environmentalism or sort of syncretic occultism, or even Buddhism and stuff like that, but apply it to a right of center political framework.
That like Savitri Devi, like there's a
yes, of
faction
course.
of like the new right who are fascinated with Hinduism. Even that's
An
other Eastern theology.
Julia Savola.
Julia
of course,
Savola, right.
was. So look, we don't even need to give a laundry list here. The information is there for anyone who scratches the surface. And by the way, needless to say, I'm not necessarily endorsing Savitri Devi or whatever, or the Atwa group. I'm not as far right as them. I do think it's interesting, however, that there are these groups that delve into stereotypically left-wing cultural spaces. In this case, the New Age one.
So Matt,
Yeah.
Matt, if you just want to kind of give a brief intro to your article, "The Renaissance of the Ritual," and how would you define occultism?
Yeah, so it is a long, somewhat academic, although rather than citing academics, it cites mostly frog Twitter figures, article. I think maybe the easiest place to start is how I would define occultism. And I've given this some thought. Obviously, the basic notion of occultism is spiritual, sort of supernatural and even magical topics, or even paranormal topics. Manipulating the universe to in line with your will, creating. I do find the Crowley definition of magic, which also is the definition of magic in a book called Pop Magic that I read, which is one of the things cited in the article. I do, there is this basic notion of magic as bringing order to chaos in line with your will. I do find that helpful. So I'm not discounting the notion of magic or that as a practice. But I find the most helpful definition of the occult for my purposes and in the article is the occult as an inquiry into those elements of nature and reality that, in my view, inform the spiritual impulse across different traditions, whether Western, Christian, Judaic, but also Eastern, like these different fixtures and elements within reality, these different things that we have access to psychologically and even scientifically that inform that basic spiritual impulse, and then are ritualizable and later codifiable into tradition. But the occultism being a goal of, as an individual, kind of tapping into the wilds, the energy outside of the codified space, whatever that energy may be on an individual. It is individualistic because you're doing it on an individualistic basis. There's a purposeful, not interpreting in line with the tradition, and instead suspending your preconceived cultural notions, and instead delving as purely as possible into the mere energy. And obviously this all sounds very woo-woo and spiritual, but I think that one can even be sort of agnostic towards spiritual matters or magical matters, and that rather, undeniably, even, and again, I am just an armchair psychologist, but undeniably there are some psychological principles you could pinpoint, and some recurring sort of anthropological elements that you can find across cultures of the way people understand themselves in relation to the divine or in relation to the universe, and the way people then ritualize that, whether it's lighting a candle or using different elements sexual practices. These are findable across cultures. So for me, the most helpful definition of occultism is just, as a enlightened individual. So before delving into, so I guess it was kind of in line with Enlightenment thought in this regard. Before delving into specific spiritual dogma, trying to pinpoint and utilize those initial elements to the best of one's ability, and to explore them to the best of one's ability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like one thing I want to kind of comment on is how different religion evolves, and a kind of a scientific atheistic approach to religion morality, like how it evolves for psychological reasons. And so there is like there's that meme of the midwit and putting it towards religion, like I think like shitting upon like religious fundamentalists and evangelicals is like, it's actually pretty cringe, because
Nowadays,
it's, but even I'd say even like 15 years ago it was becoming kind of cringe, because the whole like that's what basically what the establishment media in Hollywood does. And but I guess this might be overly simplistic, but you have like the kind of like low IQ people who are
Are you talking about like that bell curve meme?
Yeah, the bell curve meme. That's right. So at the low end of the bell curve, like you might get like the
Fundamentalists,
religious fundamentalists, evangelicals who believe in a very simplistic, like literal interpretation of religious scripts and doctrines. And then you might get, again, this is overly simplistic, but then you get I think like atheism is like peak midwit.
Yeah, totally.
And then
agnosticism,
yeah, even agnosticism to a degree, but yeah, and then like high IQ. I don't know, like making the problem with making up your own religion, besides the grifty thing, it's just hyper individualistic. But like I think a lot of high IQ people, like they tend to believe like our consciousness is like just like the very tip of the iceberg, and or the view that like pro science, but that science kind of explains, is proof for a god or spirituality. I think that is, I don't know, like kind of deism or gnosticism, like using these like overly simplistic categories. But what is like the role of intelligence comes in?
Yeah.
Because obviously, again, it's oversimplistic, because I find like because obviously someone like Richard Dawkins, who I'm definitely critical of, he's definitely is a very high IQ.
No, yeah, let's
so
get
it's
that
overly
straight.
simplistic.
Like,
yeah,
I think empirically, high IQ does correspond with atheism, but nevertheless, with that bell curve meme, I get what you're saying, because I think
it's not so much like their IQ, but maybe it is like atheism is an overly simplistic view.
There's two different types of atheists. There's a lot more than that. There's your kind of traditional academic atheists who, they're probably pretty high IQ. Maybe there's the people who kind of correspond with the basic, what's his name? Bertrand Russell's teapot thing, where it's like, I have no reason to believe in God. Okay, those people are probably high IQ. But what you have now, exactly. You have it passing down. You have that probably true notion from academia of the I don't believe in things I don't have a reason to believe, passing down to midwit culture, to normies, and then they get really aggressive and territorial, and they watch their, not to delve too into the meme stereotypes here, but I will nonetheless, they're Reddit, and they watch Rick and Morty, and they're so fucking sure of their atheism. That is the midwit type. And then the high IQ, a lot of them are going to be atheists, because a lot of them correspond to that reasonable, I don't believe in things I don't have good reason to believe in type view. But even within that group, even some of them who are a little more agnostic-y will be the types to get interested in, like, well, what does this bigger picture stuff mean? Maybe consciousness is just the tip of the iceberg. They may not believe in God, but they're not the midwits. And then there are people who are also
even like Jeffrey Giuliano, the Squid Game actor.
Yeah,
he's more from the kind of like the more like liberal hippie kind of new age stuff, very into Eastern theology. He made that kind of point, like our understanding of consciousness is only the tip of the iceberg. And then Buddhism's a whole other discussion because there is like criticism, a lot of there is sort of a stereotypical appeal of Buddhism from people from left subcultures, but then there's a good video by Ed Dutton on Buddhism, and he's not necessarily opposed to Buddhism. He's not opposed to Buddhism per se, but he said there's an interpretation that is radically liberal and radically individualistic, that basically everything, our plane of existence, is just an illusion. Everything is temporary. Everything is fleeting, and could feed into radical individualistic and nihilism. So that's an interpretation. But I guess kind of back to the idea of how religion comes from from psychology, because I think both the stereotypical like evangelicals and then the midwit atheists, actually they both tend to be blank slatists. If you have an understanding of morality and religion from HBD, how morality and religion they do evolve. Because I remember we did a podcast like 2 years ago about secular slave morality, right? And we had a lot of good points, but my stances on this, my positions evolved since then, and maybe listening back, maybe some of the stuff we said may have viewed, maybe not necessarily cringe, but just our views have probably evolved. But I do think so. The question of one's religious and moral outlook evolves from biology, and then brings up kind of questions of salvation and the Christian view of salvation only through Jesus Christ or through God, and kind of how different people, because of their psychological profile, all these different factors, including neuroticism, conscientiousness, like your whole ocean profile, that determines like how attracted you are to religion. And then if you say like a theological view that salvation is only through one religious principle, if that's correct, then maybe does that validate the extreme like Calvinist view, that there's a select few chosen for salvation, or is it totally incompatible with like the more mainline Christian view? And then there's also a sort of or does it vindicate a more kind of like Gnostic, esoteric interpretation of religion that different people, it's not so much Calvinism, but more like a view that people are selected as more kind of like castes, and they have different roles. So there is a sort of selected like spiritual caste in both a biological, psychological, and spiritual sense.
Yeah, I mean, my views are definitely a lot closer to the Gnostic notion, and that ties in with the occultist notion as well. Not from a totally elitist standpoint. I don't necessarily think anyone's better than anyone else with regard to this, but I do think there are certain people who do best with a very prescribed religious doctrine and sort of operate in this sort of midwit, middle class normally way of that. Basically, the religious equivalent of those midwit atheists we were talking about, who just kind of parrot points they read. I think that's kind of the bulk of people, but then there's a select group that are more in tune, perhaps, or could be more in tune.
Like kind of an all or nothing, and universal morality, because I haven't studied like Hinduism in depth, but interpretation that there's more like flexibility. It's a very kind of like flexible religion, philosophically and morally, and open to interpretation, which has its pros and its cons. But the idea that different moral structures, instead of universalism, that different moral structures work better for different groups based upon like psychological and genetic factors, instead of universal morality.
Yeah, no, I do think it's not a one size fits all. I mean, it's funny. I sometimes say, I'm pretty particularist in my politics. But when it comes to religious and spiritual matters, I increasingly sound like a universalist lib. I mean, I'm not liberal politically, but nevertheless, I'm very much a sort of universalist and a sort of a syncretist when it comes to religion and spiritual matters. I think all of, this isn't a me quote. I don't know if it's from Theosophy. I think I maybe heard David Lynch cite it, who is probably more influenced by Theosophy than he even lets on. But the notion that, all the world's major religions and even the lesser religions and even the tribal practices, these are all sort of paths to the top of the same mountain, and whatever is at the top of that mountain.
Oh yeah, that's also interpreted. That is interpreted as very liberal, because I do remember when I was a teenager, I attended like this Lutheran church on the west side of LA, and there was a pastor who was teaching she was preaching that there are many like paths, all religions are legitimate paths towards God, and there was a very religious family who they just got up and left. They were so appalled by the idea. So that
What do you think about that idea? Because I happen to believe it is at least potentially true, which I know would get me in hot water.
Well, the thing is, like, no one really knows for sure, but I guess
right.
No one really knows for sure, but the idea, there's two ways of looking at it. There's a radically, so with that particular pastor of the church I was attending to growing up, like, that was a very radically kind of liberal interpretation of that. But then the irony is looking at things from a standpoint of HBD. Like, you could have a more kind of esoteric, like, more rightist interpretation of the same idea.
Yeah.
That because people are different.
Oh, kind of like your
ideologically, very much. You're saying like
your pan-enclavist idea.
It is.
Yeah, you could have a religious dimension.
It is interesting. I never really thought of it that way, but you could sort of have a religious interpretation of like these political ideas, like pan-enclavism, true freedom, specialization based politics. I don't know if you read the article, but the article about like the radical center and the psychological approach to like politics and race relations, and it's a political philosophy based upon like psychology and because when people talk about like politics based on psychology, it's usually like with the left, but to understanding the psychological profile and needs, and instead of like, it's kind of the thing. I think if you take taking like the issue of racism, like the left will shut it down as like immoral. Then you get kind of like color blindness in the middle, and then you have then you have like those people who say like the extreme kind of right-wing position of like endorsing like just blind like hardcore ethno-chauvinism without, just more from like a gut instinct, like a lot of the point I make is like a lot of populist politics, like right-wing populism and left-wing populism. So this is like a topic for a whole other show, but it is different. Like, it's different from rationalism and classical liberalism, but it demands like a more sense of awareness than just like populism and just following your instinct and then following kind of like these like demagogic, like, it's also critical of demagogic figures like Trump as well. So it's a whole, as I said, it's a topic for a whole other discussion. But Matt, have you read that article, and you sort of do you understand what I'm getting at?
Which article?
The one, the Radical Center's psychologically inspired approach to race relations.
Oh, right.
And and so like understanding like the psychological motives to political decisions, and also to like the taboo aspects of human nature, but like acknowledging their legitimacy, and then finding a productive way to manage them. And
right. I mean, you're a prolific blogger, Robert, but I think I've read the article. Does it not cite? It cites Marianne Williamson? Or no?
I don't. No, it doesn't.
But Okay. Well, I don't remember the specific article, but I understand your point, and I think you've talked about it in regard to Marianne Williamson, and even a little bit into to Yang before he was got a little more cucked. But there was a kind of right wing attraction a little bit. Maybe it was a little bit of a meme, but to Marianne Williamson more so.
I don't remember the right.
A little bit.
She became sort of a meme. She became like a meme, but I think it was more like to Tulsi and to Yang.
Sure.
And then,
Tulsi and to Yang with regard to the nationalism
in the
type issues.
Yeah, the psychological aspect of politics. Yang is referenced in that regard.
Yeah, Yang is good, but
because he talked about Yang actually talked about like racism in a sense of like scarcity and
right.
a psychological
so
a scarcity mindset rather than just moral denunciation.
Right. So yeah, he's higher IQ and has a more attraction to that, right side of the bell curve who deals with things that way. But I know this was a bit more of a meme because there was, you want to talk about grifters of spirituality movements. Marianne Williamson is kind of an example, maybe not the worst and most grifty example, but an example nonetheless of someone from California dealing in New Age thought, dealing out mysticism. She was in some ways like very much cringed over by the right, but there was a certain faction on the distant right, again, maybe as a meme, and I think it included you and even perhaps Richard Spencer, who were kind of jokingly saying she is at least nice. She is kind of bringing this compassionate approach to certain issues. There's that almost Lynchian thing.
I think the difference is not so much with Yang, it's the psychological understanding rather than moral denunciation. I think the appeal to her isn't so much even ideological, it's just that she emulates like pure compassion, and that does that does seem very kind of very liberal or hippie-ish, but I think because so much of politics is about, especially on both sides, but I say more on the left and the establishment, is about like punishing your enemies, and it's about vengeance, and
right.
And I think that just enough, even though it's sort of like really like some of it stuff she says me as kind of like basic bitch kind of like hippie talking points. I think because of how our society is, just her going on Bill Maher and saying we have to show love and compassion to people who don't see the way we do, like that in some ways is become like an extreme it's become a pretty, it's in some ways it is groundbreaking.
Yeah, if you have Andrew Yang as being on the further right side of the bell curve meme here, kind of bring a high IQ policy-based approach to how we can meet people's psychological needs. Marianne Williamson is sort of the more mid-wit basic bitch version of that, but nevertheless, the mid-wit basic bitch version of something good. Let's call it the better trend coming out of the 2020 Democratic primaries, which was people willing to actually kind of psychologically grapple with the issues in society as opposed to just we don't even need to, I don't really want to rehash 2020 issues, but the opposite side where it's all these people, should basically be silenced and whatnot.
So yeah, with the whole like kind of psychological approach to politics, it includes like specialized plans and how to manage like not just like mental health, but just how does society manage things like the competition for social status that drive politics. So I think where the political, like my article on politics, on psychological approach to politics and the radical center relates to your article on the new spiritual movement. It's this idea of quasi-occultists in some ways is being in touch with the darker side of human nature,
right,
but on also having a better understanding of one's own subconscious and all the things that but it's different than rationalism and classical liberalism, but understanding like all our actions and not analyzing it so much from a rationalist standpoint. What we do, like the rationalists will say, are what we doing, is it rational or is it overly emotionally driven? But trying to have a better understanding about these deeper subconscious and psychosocial motives. And the occultist angle comes in as being in touch with that like dark energy. But then is it in some sense like how to not rejecting it, but instead like understanding it better and then sort of in a sense taming it?
Yeah, that resonates to a degree. I think it's about definitely it's as opposed to that's one attraction that I've had. By the way, I'm going to answer this question, then we should pause because we're coming up on our checkout time. Okay, so I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to pause, and we'll deal with the rest later. Okay, it's going to be good. That definitely resonates. I think one thing that attracts me to, a lot of what I've described as my attraction to occultism more recently has to do pretty specifically with the phase of life that I'm in, and also the phase of, the political dialectic that we are all in, and the state of society as being chaotic, and the state of older belief systems, sort of facing certain challenges. This one would be something I would say pretty much in favor of occultism for any age, is that the relationship with darkness and with the dark side, what Jung, who I'm no expert on, but I will nevertheless cite, what Jung cites as kind of a shadow work or the shadow self, or however he puts it. Occultism's ability to delve into that and to sort of use it. And another notion that you see kicking around a lot, or that I kick around in my article, and the type of so-called occultism that I like, is alchemy. The notion of taking dark matter and making it light, turning black bile into gold, etc. That notion in occult, it's present in the mystical dimensions of mainstream religion as well, but it's definitely even more explicitly part and parcel of occultism, where there's this notion of taking the dark and making it light. As you said, taking the dark sides of human nature, our dark desires, our dark capabilities, and not wishing them away under the rug, but sort of exploring them in a controlled manner, and utilizing them to beneficial purpose. Is something that really draws me in, especially to that kind of alchemical notion. One useful dichotomy here, you hear a lot, and then other people say that it's nonsense and there really is no difference, and that it's another bad binary or something, but is the right-hand path occultism versus the left-hand path. We've talked about this on past shows. I'm definitely a right-hand path guy if I had to pick a side, but I think a lot of it is about sort of bridging that gap too, and looking at the and again, to spell it out for people who may not know, left-hand path being sort of amoral, driven by what would be considered to be more amoral or immoral or baser instincts, and right-hand path being, or another way to understand it, left-hand path being Dionysian, right-hand path being Apollonian. And if I had to pick a side, I side with Apollonian. I side with bringing order to chaos rather than chaos to order. But nevertheless, I think you do need both sides. You need to tap into the Dionysian, the energy, and that's a big part of the first chunk of my essay, is you need to be willing to tap into that Dionysian energy, what Paglia calls chthonic energy. You need to be willing to tap into that as a source of energy. I mean, this is talk about the elements behind the spiritual impulse. Well, some of those elements are really messy. It's the mess of an ejaculation leads to new life. I'm not trying to be crass here. So you need to be willing to tap into that energy, but also bring order to it. And I think there is a version of that a little bit in what you're talking about, even on these kind of more quotidian political matters of taking an honest look at human psychology and using it to inform, political policy or psychological programs that lead to the betterment of society, bettering of quality of life. In real life examples, a little bit of Yang, a little bit of Marianne Williamson, but maybe even better spelled out, Robert, by Blackstone. I mean, that's an alchemical name if I've ever heard one. Blackstone. Blackstone in your novel as an example par excellence of this kind of political thinker who takes a really unflinching look at the darker aspects of humanity, but seeks to create aesthetic gold from it. We need to pause in a second, but would you want to comment on Blackstone and the role of that kind of notion in your book? All right, we're back. We had to drive. Our Airbnb checkout time was 11, so we had to drive to a viewpoint of Lake Henshaw, which is not exactly what you'd call. We're not that close, but we are pulled over the side of California Route 76, I think it's called, and we are ready to get back into it. And Robert, I had just asked about Blackstone, about Roger Blackstone from both of your novels, Journey to Vapor Island and sequel Vaporfornia, as a political alchemist, as someone who takes the black bile of human nature, the dark side of human nature, the Jungian shadow work, and is successfully able to alchemize it into a positive political program, a positive policy, and something for the betterment of all, for the betterment of society, and for the betterment of individuals. If you want to comment on that.
Yeah, Roger Blackstone. So yeah, we already did a show on Vaporfornia, but recently we were working on the addendum to Vaporfornia, going kind of reviewing Blackstone. So what he symbolizes politically, yeah, we already kind of went over that, but I think the specialization element, specialization based approach to psychology, basically what we were saying earlier is putting psychology into politics and basing politics on that different groups have different psychological needs. And yeah, a bit of that from Yang, and the sort of Promethean elements of Blackstone, which are more, you could say, relevant to Giorgiani.
Right.
The idea that like those in power, who are just kind of stifling radical creativity, but they're consolidating or hoarding on to wealth and power, like managerialism that could represent the Olympians, and this idea of radical Promethean politics. But it is sort of there is an element, but there is a kind of an element of caste to that. Like there a Promethean, like of a Promethean caste in a sense, and maybe that was like for the protagonist of that book, Max. Maybe that was a bit of like a kind of a cope, could be to like where his arc could be a bit of a cope, but also like the role of just this movement of radical creativity, of artistic, cultural, technological, and even scientific innovators like rising up, and that being
people who
not
people
everything
who would traditionally be ignored by the mainstream Blackstone, giving a voice and a platform to, right?
That's part of it. And then we kind of talked about this, like the more taboo elements getting into eugenics, but then that element, like the element with Blackstone and eugenics, the element of caste, the element of like this Promethean creator class, like I think we pretty adequately covered the political angles on our last show, but what do you get? Do you get any spiritual component from Blackstone? Obviously, a big theme in the book is also this idea of I wrote about this in my addendum, that everyone has like their own kind of personal algorithm that you have to kind of life hack, and could be a metaphysical or spiritual or even parapsychological, but it's sort of a extreme or esoteric take on psychology and self-improvement. But I guess like the alternative to that is just letting in the light of God or the light of the universe, like photosynthesis, everything, and just take that in. But it does correspond somewhat to like an abstract sense of like chaos magic over a specific like algorithmic regimen. So Matt, if you want to comment on that, but then also like what is this, like the spiritual component of what Blackstone represents as an archetype too?
Sure. Yeah. No, you talked about the dichotomy you're laying out between a certain a certain kind of chaos magic type thought, which to me sounds exhausting and like havoc on anyone who has any inkling of obsessive compulsive tendencies. The notion of like I have to tap into my true the notion there's the Crowleyan notion of tapping into your true will, and you could drive yourself crazy trying to, you know, access like what is the exact right thing I have to do right now, the exact right situation I have to put myself in in order to tap into my true will, to hack into you know, my perfect life. That is a notion that I think, respectfully, Robert, I think you struggle with a bit. It's something I think that a lot of us struggle with a bit, including myself. But I try to look at that's like the, I guess, a possible pitfall of tapping into occult type thinking, or certainly any Crowley true will type thinking, is that you drive yourself crazy with, does this little thing mean this, and I have to do this, and this is my true will. And even if you were just, even without the occult element, you can get into this headspace if you're like a Christian and you're wondering what God's will is for you. You can really trip over yourself worrying about the specific details of, should I do this, that, and the other thing. But I find a much more helpful metaphor to use.
It's not just occultist, because if you do like a Google search for Christians OCD, like these people, they're not, well, they're Christians or not. It's the opposite of occultists, but these people are actually in like utter psychological torment,
right? Because
they try to combine their OCD with religion.
Yeah.
And basically the advice from most of these like theological counselors is just sort of to embrace God and then to let go of all that nonsense.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what I was about to say, because it really isn't an occult issue. It's really an issue of any spirituality. And when you bring in something like the notion of hell and brimstone into the equation, that can drive you even crazier. And that's the answer. In as far as there is a simple answer, is to let go and let God. I think that applies just as much for a Orthodox Christian as for someone who's a little more New Agey. You just need, or, you know, you could say the universe even, like, you just have to let go. And I find it useful to imagine myself as a plant sort of photosynthesizing the light of God, the light of the universe, as you said, Robert. Just kind of not being passive, because you do need to be active when the time calls, but just recognizing that is our fundamental state, is not as prime movers unmoved, but rather inflectors of a greater light. I do think, on that Crowley notion of the true will, and on the notion of the occult in general, I do think that we do have a considerable amount of power as creators, and definitely as artists. You know, we are playing the role of God in our work. You know, there is a special relation there, and like a little bit of obsessive compulsive, a little bit of what do I really need to do? That's okay. But you just, in that dark hour where you're driven crazy, you need to know when to surrender. And I think that is a much more spiritually palatable way of going through.
Yeah, then,
and not fussing too much over the past is the other thing to remember.
Yeah, that is another huge theme in the book, like alternative life paths and alternative futures, what could have been, definitely. Then the ethereal realm, the vapor, and then like the astral plane,
Right.
which it's a more esoteric, it's a more theological or esoteric concept. Also has to do with like your soul after you die. But the thing is, and then there's Timothy Leary's idea that you can hack into the astral plane
With psychedelics.
And or the astral plane in a sort of metaphoric sense. But I think another example is you listened to this on a previous. I think we listened to it on our trip back from the Barry, and I re-listened to it. So Pilliter uploaded a conversation with my old co-host Alex von Goldstein,
Right.
and I have no idea if Goldstein if Goldstein agreed permission, because that's just something Pilliter's a good friend, but sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he posts stuff without people's permission, and that's just his thing. So, but the dream world was this concept, so. But Goldstein is brilliant. Like, I used to.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
But the thing is, when you listen to this, like, you don't know. It's like some people might interpret it as a genius. Some people might come across as totally schizophrenic, or to some people it might just be a metaphor, and it's this idea. But it also gets in that there is this kind of. So what Goldstein talks about is dream world, like the astral plane or the vapor, is this world where people's subconscious are sort of interconnected and deals with telepathy. But then it also deals a bit with like a spiritual cast. Like there's certain groups of people who are attuned to it. And he was even saying even people who are more like on the spectrum, saying like they're more kind of attuned. And
yeah.
Or this idea that like there's this weird esoteric idea that schizophrenics are actually attuned. Seers, yeah, like that's a thing. But yeah, well, if you listen to that, like I think different people interpret Alex von Goldstein's dream world like in a different manner. But did you listen to the same audio from Pillator? He posted it to his Substack. Like, what did you get a lot out of it?
It's going back about a year now, but yeah, I do think there is a certain brilliance to what Alex was saying in that. I think it is roughly analogous to what you call the vapor. I think you talk about it in your addendum, the notion of using aesthetics to kind of communicate a message in chaos magic and in the occult. That's called sigils. And it's basically the same thing as meme magic. It's using symbolism and imagery and aesthetics to communicate a non-verbal idea on a sort of higher, like through the astral plane, so to speak. And I interpret, there's probably more to it than that, but I basically interpreted Alex von Goldstein's dream world notion as that, and it's the same way that I sort of interpret your vapor metaphor in your novels. And it's definitely part and parcel of the kind of occult notions that I'm talking about here. I mean, honestly, I've on and off throughout my life been a little bit interested in occult topics, but definitely probably the start of my current interest goes back to like 2016, 2017 times when everyone was talking about meme magic and this notion that meme magic worked, and it kind of seemed to, and I think there is kind of a parapsychological explanation for that, the way images can, and through the internet especially when they're reproduced in mass, can communicate a powerful message and change minds. It also corresponds a little bit to my old blog, altofcenter.com, where in our old conversations we've had, Robert, about basically the politics of aesthetics and sort of using aesthetics as this incredibly politically potent tool. Yeah, it's these are that's like a central tenet of what I'm interested in. I would say is sigils and aesthetic magic.
I guess the idea, like, there's an idea that aesthetics is not just worldly. If you create like aesthetics that are on such a that are so groundbreaking, you open up some ethereal realm, or the quote that man's longing to be reunited with the divine. Right. I forget.
From Zurius, the musician, I think, talks about.
Oh, that. Right. Yeah, from Zurius. Also the end of that's like the last line of my Vaporfornia too.
Yeah, no, it's a notion that speaks to me a lot. The notion of trying to get back in touch with the divinity and our yearnings, our nostalgia, whatever that Portuguese word you mentioned, saudade.
Saudade is
homesickness for a place that you're not sure exists, basically.
Longing for what could have been in a hypnagogic state.
Exactly. That's part and parcel of what informs me spiritually and even occultically, if that's a word, as well, is that notion of longing to be reunited with the divine. And maybe this leads a little bit into the degree to which I think some of these occult notions that I'm kicking around here and I kick around in my article they are not necessarily in contradiction with, certainly not in contradiction with monotheism or traditional religion. I rather think they can be complementary, and I have kind of a specific theory about that if you don't mind, I'll get into. One definition of the occult is that it's kind of the shadow of the prevailing belief system or the mainstream belief system, often in some degree of opposition to it or in some, subversive against it. My take on it, similar to my definition being just getting back in touch with the primal stuffs of spirituality in the first place, has to do with it's not the shadow of the prevailing belief system, or it is the shadow, but rather than a shadow existing next to it, it's a post shadow, that religion in the West, as gets into heady philosophical waters, but also mystical waters. Religion in the West and Christianity as the product of a certain logos, as E. Michael Jones would call it, and the unraveling of a certain logic is kind of coming to an end, and it's dried up and lost its vigor like a fish on the shore. This is a metaphor I take from Alexander Dugin, who is also an occultist. I take that notion seriously, and I think that the type of occult notion that I'm interested in, it's not subverting the mainstream religion so much as recognizing that it is in crisis and it's been dried up by over-rationalization and a myriad other forces, which I don't necessarily want to get into spelling out. But I think it's something that a lot of people can see if they look, that, religion is, in the West in general, in the Spenglerian sense, is been sapped of its vigor. And we now need to look to find some way of restoring that vigor. And I think that we can find this in certain, delving carefully, because we are playing with fire when we're dealing with these fundamental matters, and it's not for everyone. But some of us who exhibit a degree of caution and are attuned to these things, I think, can kind of tap into that primal stuff, that primal fire, from which new traditions can be founded. And I think that's pretty much the TLDR of my Substack piece, is that we need to do that, and that I think certain not to suck anyone's dick too hard, but certain frog Twitter figures like Bronze Age Pervert and Mike Ma and others have begun that process. And,
I just kind of go over these different points. Is like there was like what Nietzsche calls a Dionysian. There also relates to Camille Paglia take on the basic that there is this kind of like basic primal force of nature that's behind all arts and literature.
And sexuality.
Sexuality. Yeah. But then that gets more Freudian, that like sexuality.
Yeah, well, that's.
But there is validity in that. Yeah.
Right. That's a corner I would wish to. I don't want to go down the Freudian path.
Right, and then you have like Baps, Bronze Age Pervert, all the foundationalist versus traditionalist, and then Mike Ma is. I've never read his book, but I've just listened to his playlist, and
all right, you listen to his Spotify
playlist, and he. So the thing is, he flirts with occultism, but he's also in some ways is radically trad right. Like in his book, he advocates like executing like basically all degenerates. So he is pretty hardcore. And then, but the thing is, he does. But he refers to himself as an instinctive Christian. So is that getting back to what we said earlier in the podcast, how religion, instead of trying to kind of impose religion and theology like top down, just that religious values comes from instincts.
Yeah, exactly. Can you hear me that? Thanks. That notion of instinctive Christianity, that you could access a Christian theology or morality or way of life without necessarily ever having read the Bible. I mean, I assume theologians have grappled with this. Like, how can someone born in the Amazon rainforest away from society best be a Christian? I mean, there must be some kind of answer to that. What is it? And I think it would have to do with tapping into these basic psychological. Obviously, most Christian teaching, it is a teaching of logos. You do need to learn, but there must be some instinctual, fingerprints of the universe that anyone can access anywhere. And I think the question, I'm not exactly sure if that's what Mike Ma's getting at, but maybe. And I think the question is, how do you sort of access those? And for that, if you were able to do that, you can refound, I talk about the foundation of new traditions, but this could also be a way to refound old ones. If you're able to do that, and you don't need to actually forget your Bible or anything, but if you're able to re-tap into that vital energy that, if you're a religious person, you must believe it is out there. If you're able to do that, then you can refound the religion for yourself, and before long, you can refound it for others. The piece I wrote for Substack is the name is taken from a section in Mike Ma's book, Gothic Violence, The Renaissance of the Ritual, in which he describes a program where, yes, as you say, he is a traditionalist, right? And he talks about this sort of very based on right-wing sacrifice of all the unworthy gatekeepers and this, that, and the other thing. But the part that really spoke to me was where he says, in our lifetime, we will see the reemergence of white magic, not occultism, but or what is it? I don't have the quote in front of me, but I can almost quote it, I think. Not darkness, but a closeness to it. Not occultism, but the rituals of it. That's what he advocates. So not occultism, but the rituals of it. And that notion, the aesthetic freedom the aesthetic freedom that comes from that, rather than trying to always, conform yourself to religion as it has been taught to you, which in so many instances is so cucked and so dry. If you look at a lot of mainstream denominations, even Catholicism, there's a considerable amount of liberalism to it. Rather than always trying to comply with that, which probably has its value, I will add as a caveat. People need community, etc. I'm not advocating that anyone stop going to church if you go, but at the same time, a lot of us find that we need something more. And I think that the type of aesthetic freedom that Ma indicates in this notion of not occultism but the rituals of it, which I interpret as getting back in touch with those figments of reality and nature that underlie the spiritual impulse or even the Christian impulse, I think is the answer to recapturing that vigor. And I also, if I could just go on my tangent here, I think, again, and not to be Mr. Tealbuck's frog Twitter citing all the right accounts guy, but BAP, talks about the refounding of traditions quite a bit, and he himself, with his sort of
with BAP, he says foundationalism, but not traditionalism.
Right. Well, with BAP, there's a quote from this article that I wrote for the Puritan Spring where he talks about basically that he's not anti-traditionalist, but says that tradition is basically gone. That no one, I think he says, except for in a few nooks of imperial Japanese palaces or in Bhutan, because BAP's on this kind of a little bit of a theosophy kick, I would say, with Tibet and, secretive esoteric Eastern traditions. But for the most part, he thinks, I guess, that traditionalism is completely cucked and dried up in the West. You can't access to it. You have no access to it. So we are in the position where we must found new traditions and re-tap into that. And it corresponds to tapping into certain Nietzschean vitalism. So the bodybuilding, the sunbathing, it's all the healthy diet, the getting back in touch with your body. It's all part and parcel for BAP. I think for Ma it's similar. What were you going to say?
Yeah, it also relates to the politics of retrofuturism. Not going back, but tapping into that alternative time frame. And then you have with Prometheism, Jason Giorgiani, that could be interpreted as Satanism in the sense of rebelling against God, the idea of stealing the fire from the gods.
Yes.
And Prometheus, obviously in Greek mythology, rebelled against Zeus and the
Right.
rebelled against Zeus and the Olympians, and we talked about the fictional presidential candidate Roger Blackstone, and the billionaire entrepreneur, and Giorgiani's a Prometheus, so he's very adamant that he wants nothing to do with Christianity. There's absolutely no reconciliation, and
Right.
would you agree with that?
No.
Or could
Yeah.
Or do you think he's too rigid? Do you think there can be value in things that are obviously so fundamentally at odds with one another? Was his take?
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily think so. And part of my disagreement stems from not having a powerful counter argument as much as that I am just more syncretic and frankly liberal in my spiritual views. That I think that yes, you could eschew Christianity and eschew Judeo-Christianity and perhaps be a neo-pagan, or perhaps, as a lot of right-wing people are, or perhaps be something different altogether. I'm not necessarily opposed to doing that. I just very much think that what I'm interested in is making a more modest point than a whole new Promethean religion to refound the West. No, I'm much more interested in giving people a toolbox, whether you're somewhat agnostic and just want, a kind of creative and spiritual outlet, which is kind of, I'm not agnostic. I do believe in God, but I'm not currently practicing any religion, so I'm a little closer to that. But also, if you are even a very traditionalist, Catholic or Christian, I don't think that tapping into some of this kind of, call it a certain spiritual vitalism, is at odds with it. I think that people, and again, not to full-heartedly endorse everything this man stands for, but someone like Alexander Dugin with his old believers, orthodoxy, but also interest in Crowley, I think is an example of this. And I think it's the type of thing that sort of will need to happen and will inevitably happen moving forward spiritually in the West. And this, a little bit of a side point here, but I think, the spiritual revolution, whatever happens next spiritually, I believe takes precedent over anything else that happens politically, racially, whatever. Like, there needs to be this renewal.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think this is a good time to wrap up.
Almost. I want to make a couple.
Yeah, if you just want to make like some of your last final points, and with this, I wouldn't even call it like a movement, a new spirituality movement. Like so far, it's just like an open-ended like philosophical discussion. Remember when you got to the top of the waterfall, the open-ended top of the waterfall by Emerald.
Right. Emerald
Pool in Yosemite, and you were just like, and I was thinking like, is this guy Matt Pegas here really gonna start a new religion, or is he totally full of shit?
Mm-hmm.
But this seemed like it's just like an open-ended philosophical discussion that may or may not lead somewhere.
Right.
But before we wrap up, do you want to make like
my last pitch?
Your last pitch, your last thoughts on kind of wrapping up everything we've discussed this morning. And then also, if you actually do have like grandiose plans for the future.
Why, yes, I do, Robert. Thanks for asking. So, this will kind of be by way of summary, but I envision an affirmative spirituality or religion that attempts to create order in a chaotic and random universe, something that recognizes the chaos and randomness, definitely of our times, but perhaps even, as in chaos magic, the fundamental randomness of everything, and seeks to bring order to that in line with the will. That's very simply what I advocate. I lay out a few steps in my article. It's about you must seek the aesthetic wonderment first and foremost. You must affirm the mess of the universe, and then you must, create order from chaos. Whether that's inventing your own rituals, alchemizing darkness into light. That's the basis of what I advocate. I'm interested in a self-initiatory process. I think that people should take these ideas for themselves and apply them, and I'm happy to be in touch with anyone who does so. It's an anti-grift. I'm not looking to make any money off of this. Beyond, if I do write something, I'll obviously sell it for a fair price, and whatever. But like, I'm not. This is the opposite. As a matter of principle, this shall be the opposite of a grift. It's about stealing fire from the gods. It's about stealing fire from the gatekeepers and do magic as a birthright, etc. So I envision this as something that can be kind of taken on its own terms, almost like a new religion or a new spiritual program, or it can be used to complement existing religions as a means of renewing older beliefs. It's definitely influenced by certain frog Twitter figures like Ma and Bap, and the notion of foundationalism as opposed to traditionalism, the notion of refounding new traditions in this sort of post, where Dugin talks about pre-order chaos and post-order chaos. Pre-order chaos being that sort of Dionysian element at the foundation of things, which I believe in tapping into. Post-order chaos being the perceived chaos of logos and decay, which I think we have in the West. And it is this chaotic moment in which we can re-access that original mystical pre-order chaos. I know in order to do that, I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Great show, and it was a great discussion, and take care, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye. Let me just say one last thing that I may slip in earlier, and I may cut this out if it doesn't work, but Arthur Schopenhauer, I just did want to make this point. Arthur Schopenhauer is another good example of someone, in some ways, the great godfather of New Age thought in the West, pretty much the first known Western Buddhist, if I'm not mistaken, someone who really researched that, and and his thought is affiliated with the right. So just as a point of illustration, and certainly Bap talks a lot about Schopenhauer and finding light in Eastern thought. That is absolutely a excellent precedent for the degree to which there is an esoteric to based pipeline.
Yeah, you can.
Anything else you want to add? We can put it in later. I'm gonna wrap up for you.
Yeah, and I don't know, not much. I mean, I think you pretty much covered it. Then also Jungian. I haven't studied Jung extensively, so I don't have
Go on.
like a whole lot to say. But it's also relevant to Jungian psychology,
Definitely relevant
like
to
the
Jungian psychology,
subconscious, and kind of combining like spirituality with psychology in that regards. But I don't have a whole lot
and
to
to
say.
this day, you can still go into like random, what's it called? Very random, new age bookstores and occult bookstores, and they still have Jung. Like, he's still definitely relevant. Yeah. What were you gonna say? You can say it.
That's all.
Yeah.
Are you gonna edit that part in?
Yeah, I'll edit in. Oh yeah, the other part I
Will you
will
be
edit
able
it.
to edit that in?
Yeah, I'll be able to edit in. The other thing I was gonna say was theosophy, which seems super liberal. No religion is above truth. Syncretic, taking influence by different religions. Interestingly, that too had a significant influence over like the Nazis and whatnot. Case in point, some of these broader old school new agey ideas were definitely not definitely amenable to the right, and perhaps even more amenable to the right than they would have been to the left. As an interesting side note, theosophy is something I'd like to study more, but they do say it influenced everyone from Hitler to Lynch.